Season 7, The Dragon Prince, we're here, potentially at the end, potentially not quite. We'll get into that a little bit as we go. First and foremost, excuses for the voice. I have been quite sick over the last week or so, which is also why this is a couple of days late, and also why I didn't take any in-depth notes while watching this, because I was literally sick in bed while watching this season. So I'm just going to kind of go through episode by episode and skim through and talk about things as I see them again. I'm sure that as we go through, my memory will get jogged about things and I'll go on a bunch of different sub-rants, but let's get going with the start of the season, which is immediately not exactly what I expected or would have hoped. I get it, this is potentially the final season, we don't have any time to waste, which is very funny because there's definitely time that is wasted in this season, but I was kind of expecting to see more of a reaction to Runan being back and suddenly having to be friendly toward the people he was trying to murder the last time we saw him, right? Last time we saw him, he was trying to kill Azran and of course King Harrow, and then also Callum was kind of mixed in there. He wasn't the target, but he was kind of in the way and seemed to be an enemy. And the fact that he gets brought back without any context of what has happened over the past 3 years, and Rayla suddenly hey, this is Callum. That's how we ended off the last season. And then Callum was oh no, I can see smoke from, oh, that's not good. And that little meeting that happens in between there, we don't get to see. And I kind of wanted to see that. It's a little character moment that we missed out on, and there's so much to cover in this season that, again, I get it, we don't have time to dive into every single potential tiny little bit of character interaction, but this is one in particular that I would have liked to see. On the other side of our antagonists, I guess, we have Claudia and we have Team Erebos, right? And I kind of really like the way Erebos is just kind of chilling, being absolutely humongous and playing with the two different styles and combining them, mostly just because I feel like the animators kind of got tired of having these two different styles that don't really serve two different purposes anymore at this point around, so they just combine it into one, and that's honestly fine. And we get into the whole goal for them for this season, which is inverting the Moon Nexus, and to do that we need to first have a Moon Primal Stone, and that just gets them going, right? It sets up the majority of what they're going to be up to this season before the actual big climax after the Moon Nexus gets inverted. And I don't really have much to say about that, aside from the fact that you can definitely tell that Terry is not about this, at all. He thinks, okay, you're free, good, we've done our thing, I'm out of here. Except he's not quite yet out of there. Of course, the whole Erebos never lying, but also not quite telling the truth about the in-between and the fact that Viren might be there, which comes back a little bit later in the season as well. Now, Callum goes back home, sees that Katolas has been entirely destroyed. We get a little bit of an insight from Soren that it was a huge-ass, big-ass dragon that pretty much nuked all of them. And this is where I was kind of surprised, because it takes a hot minute for the main cast to realize that Erebos is back to begin with. I was kind of expecting that to be an episode 1 or 2 reveal. Callum going back and then ending up going to the Valley of the Kings to go check on that dragon or whatever to see what's up, and running into Erebos there. Instead, it takes about half the season for the main good guys to figure out what's going on, and I actually think I kind of like that. If it weren't for the fact that, again, we're working on a very tight schedule here, if this was a situation where we end up having the confirmed next 3 seasons, which as of right now I don't think have been confirmed yet, but are definitely in the plans as they were making this season, which you can very much tell. If they, the creators, had the confirmation that they had those 3 more seasons, I feel like they could have stretched out that not knowing Erebos' back bit a little bit longer, and maybe even made that a end of season reveal for our characters. Which means that they wouldn't necessarily have to rush the second half of the season so much, because the second half of the season, while it is packed with a lot of good stuff, is very much rushed. Anyway, at this point, Azran and his whole group of people also return to see the ruins, and everybody is just big sad at the same time. Erebos turns into an island. That kind of came out of nowhere, but sure, I'm here for it. I don't mind it. It's kind of funny. And eventually, Rayla and Renan also go back to Catullus, where everybody is, where I don't like this character moment coming up. Because this could have been an interesting setup for an interesting theme to explore, which they just kind of missed out on. And again, this is because if we had a season to explore a handful of interesting themes, this could have been one. But instead, as is the case with so many of the recent seasons of The Dragon Prince, is the story is just mixed up between too many different sub-stories. We have too many different like little sub-teams that we're following along, which means that none of them really get a lot of focus, which means that we don't get the opportunity to really explore any like character philosophies or any like bigger world thematics. And the potential themes that I see here that we could explore is the very much archaic nature of a monarchy. Because what ends up happening is just because Azran is in a bad mood, he ends up seeing somebody that he can target that rage at and ends up being partly justifiably so, but also partly very hypocritically looking him up and punishing this person because he sees Renan and he's like, all of this started with you, which not really, no. Like not even close. Like nothing that happened here that's the cause of your like actual sadness at this moment is in any way like reasonably linked back to Renan killing King Harrow. Aside from the fact that that is the cause of the reason that you went on your adventure in the first place and made peace with the elves, and that is then the reason that the Sunfire elves started like infighting, which is the reason that there was a civil war, which was like, that's way too much butterfly effect. There's no reasonable relation between the assassination of King Harrow and what happened in Catullus. There's not enough of a causal effect there to be anywhere near reasonable, and that's the point. It's a weak character moment because it is a character at their weakest point. But it's a character at their weakest point who holds a lot of power. And at the end of the season, Azran just kind of invents democracy, which that could have been a very interesting character arc where he decides that a king might not be a good way to govern a country or a people, right? And he decides to step down in order to like create the first democracy. That doesn't happen at all, because this season doesn't have time for an interesting exploration of a theme like that. If you cast your mind back to The Legend of Korra, because a lot of people watching this are Avatar fans, a lot of people will have seen The Legend of Korra, and there's generally like one thing that everybody can agree on in The Legend of Korra, and that is Season 3 is really good, and Zahir is an interesting antagonist. Because this is kind of like the crux of his thesis is we don't want to have these like singular people with all the power in the world. And then the season after that we have Prince Wu, which is supposed to become the new Earth King. Nobody likes him until the very end of the season, where he does one likable thing and decides that, hey, maybe a monarchy isn't really a good way forward for this country, and maybe we should have a democracy of some kind. Which also is universally like the only thing that that character does that anybody likes, right? They had an opportunity to do something interesting along those lines here, and they didn't, because that's not what this season was about. But honestly, maybe it should have been. And that ends up being mostly what episode 2 is about as well. The conflict between Azran and Callum about keeping Renan locked up, and Rayla being totally not about this, by the way, and Callum deciding to do the right thing, not necessarily just go along with what Rayla wants, not go along with what Azran wants. He's like, what do I think is the right thing? And go along with that. And I appreciate that. He's not got an alliance to either or. He just thinks, okay, these two people that I very much care about both have, at this moment in time, opposing goals and opposing views. I'm going to have to choose at some point, one way or another. He chooses based on his own morals, not based on who he has more alliance to. He chooses based on what he thinks is right, which might set up some kind of character for later on in the season. Yeah, we'll come back to that probably. So for episode 2, the evil part of the episode, I don't really care too much for what happens. We have Erebos being like slightly happy to go on a merry-go-round, which is nice. I like the fact that our villain is not just pure evil until he kind of is. But then they try to make him not pure evil again, but he kind of is. They can't make up their mind on Erebos being either like the sympathetic villain or being just pure evil. He literally has like 3 or 4 evil laughing scenes in this season. But at the same time, they want you to like sympathize with him because like the whole situation with like his daughter and the way that he now kind of imprints that kind of creepily onto Claudia and the way he likes to have fun and all that stuff. But he also is cartoonishly evil at times, which I don't think matches that well. It can be done, don't get me wrong. You can make something very, very evil while also having nuance. But I just don't think that having him literally do the evil dude laugh multiple times in the season, I don't think that helps. What I will say about this episode as well is that Queen Anya is just kind of hanging about for some reason. And at some point, Azran asks her, hey, what would you do in my place? And she's like, hey, that's your kingdom. That's not my fucking problem. You figure it out. And at that point, we're literally all like, okay, but then why are you here? Including Azran, like, in the scene. He's like, hey, you're here because I want your opinion. I'm asking your opinion. Why aren't you giving me your opinion? Which is all fine. Like, you can say, okay, I'm not getting this involved with, like, matters from another kingdom. I want to support you as, like, an ally, as a friend, but I don't want to get, like, too intertwined within this. Until later in the episode, when she is very happy to shoot people with her bow and arrow. I don't know, man. That doesn't seem to really, like, rhyme very well with, I don't want to give you my opinion. This is a matter for your kingdom. And then something that is very much a matter of his kingdom, by the way, one of his prisoners, she's very happy to shoot. I don't know. That doesn't add up. I mean, she is there for the drama, for the shooting. That's the reason that she's still around. And then also to facilitate some MacGuffins that explode later. That's mostly the reason why she's there, probably. But just don't have her take a very passive role in, like, the council scene. At that point, it feels like she's actually there as an ally and as a helpful force. And it doesn't feel that weird that she suddenly goes from being super passive to literally almost shooting a dude's arm off, right? I wasn't a huge fan of the way they wrote that. Like, that made no sense, like, even a little bit. Also, I get that, like, the king's god and all these people are, like, loyal to their king. I'm kind of pissed that no character at any point in time seemed to hesitate for more than, like, half a second to attack, like, Rayla and Runan while they were escaping. At some point, somebody is gonna, like, look at this kid and say, hey, I get it, man, but you're out of line here. And Callum does that, but I'm kind of disappointed with Soren also doing that. Because at this point, have we forgotten what his character arc in the first half of the show was? His character arc was going from, like, stupid henchman that does anything he's told because he's too stupid to think for himself, to deciding, hey, wait, no, what is happening here is not okay. I'm not going to support this. I'm going to do my own thing and do the right thing. This same dude is now degraded to just being a stupid henchman for what we perceive to be the good guys. So suffice it to say, maybe I wasn't a huge fan of what episode 2 did, for the most part. And that kind of trickles down to the rest of the season. Azran is just not a likable character in this season. And until the very end where he's like, okay, I want to, like, talk to Renan and I'm going to try to forgive you and whatever. That's a little, like, too flat and too late without any depth to it. Because that is a solution or a resolution of the situation, of that conflict. It does in no way actually address the source of the issue, which again would have been an interesting character arc, that being this one child has altogether too much power. And up until now, that's been fine because he's been one of the good guys. But that doesn't mean that it is inherently not a problem that a child has this much power, right? And in general, like, one person shouldn't have that much power, let alone a child. That should have been the through line of that story, and it wasn't, and because of that, the resolution of that story kind of fell flat. Now, I don't think I have much more to talk about for the rest of the season on that, so I think we can start skipping through these episodes a little bit faster. Going into episode 3, the only thing that I will say that they did end up using this Ezran storyline for is to mirror the Sunfire Elf storyline with Queen Janai and her brother Kareem, right? Because she's a queen, she's pissed at her brother, and they need to figure it out. Except that her brother is actually actively evil, so that parallel doesn't really work. And that parallel could have worked if they decided to do something interesting with his character, Kareem's character as well, in this season. But they didn't. They did give him the single best scene that he's been in the entire series so far.
Together, great one, we can...
His character is as flat as always, probably even flatter, to be honest. So far, his entire motivation has been wanting a different path for his people and feeling that what he envisions is the best way to provide for his people. In this season, he's just a power-hungry dick. It's another one of those characters which had some depth to it, but just doesn't get the time in this season to show any of that depth. So he's been shallowed out a lot. And the weird part is, I've been recording for about 25 minutes at this point, and I've been complaining a lot, which is weird because I like this season. I don't like it as much as Season 6. I don't like it as much as Season 2 or 3, but I definitely like it more than Season 4 and 5. I don't know how it stacks up against Season 1, to be honest, because Season 1 is a little bit weird in quality rankings, in my opinion. But it's definitely up there in the mid-range of seasons for me, which, I mean, I don't know at this point if the mid-range of seasons of The Dragon Prince is a very good ranking, because we've had some actually awful seasons, but we've also had some really, really good ones. So I think that this season is altogether a pretty good watch, but I think the problems that I'm running into here are more emblematic of a bigger issue. And that is that the way that these kind of shows get greenlit with a handful of seasons at a time, instead of getting the go-ahead to just tell the story that needs to be told, or that they want to tell. And that results in these seasons that, at the end of Season 3, right? I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit, and I jump back a little bit, and all that kind of stuff. The end of Season 3 was effectively a good end for the show, because they were greenlit up until Season 3, and then the question was, do we get a second arc up till Season 7, in this case? And Season 6 ended, Season 3 rather, ended in a way that could have ended the show, but they added in one more scene where, hey, Viren is alive, some stuff is happening. And in the end, this season kind of tried to do the same thing, because they were greenlit up until Season 7, and there is this plan for 3 more seasons to have a third arc. But they didn't do it the same way, where there was a satisfying conclusion with the possibility of something else happening. This season ended with the assumption that there was going to be more content, but there is a climax just in case there isn't going to be any more content. But it's a very weak climax if we don't get the other 3 seasons. And the fact that they, as a production crew, don't have the full vision on whether or not they get the seasons they need to tell the story they want to tell, doesn't fully excuse the sloppy writing and the same mistakes they make time after time again, which 9 times out of 10, the mistakes they make in writing come back to they are too scattered. They have too many stories going on at the same time. You need to have an A plot and a B plot, and maybe sometimes you can have a very minor C plot in these kind of shows, and that is it. We are, at this point, kind of used to having 4 separate, plots, or at least 4 separate groups of characters going through 4 separate adventures that, at the end, come together to make for a finale. But that means that none of those 4 separate stories can really, get the depth that they require to tell a good story and to explore some interesting stuff. And in this season, I think splitting up Team Callum and Team Ezran into 2 different teams is for the most part unnecessary. And putting those back together would have just gotten rid of the Angry King storyline, which is fine because they didn't do anything with that anyway that was worthwhile. And then the only thing that we get out of that split anyway is that at some point, Azran is worried that Callum is going to do something terrible because he's getting manipulated by Erebos, which also doesn't really lead anywhere, because while that is happening, we already very much know Callum's thought process. So it's not even like it's showing us, the viewer, what's on the table as far as like bad options goes before the show itself tells it. It's just the show tells us, hey, Callum still has this cursed coin. Then we get some other content. Then we get Azran being worried that Callum will do something terrible, where we're like, okay, but we've already had this plot point. We've had this plot point on Callum's side. We don't need this plot point again on Azran's side unless Azran is going to actively interface with this, which he doesn't do. So why does that scene exist? Why? And I'm going to entirely abandon at this point the structure of talking episode by episode. Why does the Nova Blade get brought back? The Nova Blade gets brought back because it was mentioned in a previous season as an option to take care of Erebos, and then I guess the writers were like, oh fuck, yeah, we did mention that, didn't we? We probably should do something with that. And the only thing that it does is at the climax of the entire season, where everybody is fighting against like gigantic Erebos, it gives Callum like a closing window in which he needs to do the dark magic spell and sacrifice his own life and all that kind of good stuff before Azran gets there to kill Erebos with the Nova Blade. Except that Erebos fucking dies anyway by just getting bit by an Archdragon. So the Nova Blade didn't actually matter there at all anyway. They could have very much just had that thing going, and Erebos could have just been taunting him like, oh, yeah, you better seal me before these dragons bite me, because that's gonna be bad for everybody. There's no reason for like the Nova Blade and Azran to be involved in that story at all. That said, though, I did like that part of the prophecy before going into the final battle is like one with dark eyes will sacrifice himself to murder Erebos. And Callum's like, yep, that sounds about right. And that is the moment where we're all like, okay, so it's not going to be Callum because we need a twist. And then Avzandam lands in like his ghost form. And you see he has black eyes and you're like, oh, I see what's going on. But that doesn't make it any less impactful because Callum still does do the sacrificial spell. At least he starts doing it before he gets interrupted. We get a really nice moment where he's like, Renan will do it because I know that Rayla will not. And then Renan gets kicked off the tower and Rayla does pick up the bow and she's like, guess it's gotta be fucking me. And a part of me wanted that to be the way that this resolves, is Callum actually having to sacrifice himself. And specifically for Rayla to do it, because I think there's like, throughout the last couple of seasons, Callum has asked Rayla to kill him like 3 times as well, or something like. So it really felt like that's something that they were working toward, but then just kind of didn't have the balls to do. I'm very happy from like a fanboy perspective that we're gonna have those 10 human elf babies. Very, very funny scene. Like I'm very happy. I like their relationship. I like their ship. It really, like, seeing them together on screen just makes me happy. And I really, really do like that. From a purely like storytelling, writing perspective, aside from my enjoyment of the characters themselves, she should have shot him. Callum should have died there. And that's another one of those. We have the possibility of 3 more seasons. And I feel like if we didn't need those 3 more seasons, Callum could have died there. And it could have been a bittersweet ending. But it wasn't. And we're going to get more content, which is maybe, because again, it's not been greenlit yet as far as I know, but which is great if we do get more seasons. But a lot of things that happen in this season feel like they can only happen this way if there's more seasons. But this season also needed to work as a finale. And you just can't do both. Season 3 got away with being a finale that added an extra cliffhanger, an extra opening for, hey, we can keep going. Because it was a finale first and a setup second. And this is just kind of, this is Empire Strikes Back. This wasn't a victory. This was an escape. But it's delivered in such a way that we're supposed to believe that it's a finale and a victory. And I just think that altogether this season has a bit of an identity crisis. Which I feel like is something that I've said over the last couple of seasons, every single time I've reviewed one. Because I think this show doesn't know where it's going. I think they know where it's going on a purely plot progression basis. But a story is more than just a plot. It is characters, it is growth, it is themes, it's ideas, it's philosophies. And The Dragon Prince kind of is lacking in most of those things. It's got character, as in it's got a recognizable personality as a show, but it's also got interesting characters that like have fun and interesting connection to each other. Again, Rayla and Callum are a fantastic couple, and they're fun to watch on screen. And a lot of times in a lot of shows, and even within this show itself, characters who end up together end up oftentimes breaking up because it is more dramatic and more interesting to watch a kind of will they, won't they dynamic. And I very much respect this show for being, at some point, brave enough to just make two characters happy together. The Dragon Prince also has a sense of plots. It knows A happens, and then B happens, and then C happens. And in a separate storyline, things happen that then play into that main storyline. It does that fairly well. But it's all fairly flat. And where season 1, 2, and 3 were a fairly linear adventure, going from point A to point B, with the whole idea of breaking the circle of violence. That was the like philosophical theme of those 3 seasons, where Viren, as the antagonist, with nuance, was opposed to that. He didn't want to break the circle of violence. He also wanted to break the circle of violence, but that's just because he wanted to break the entire other half of that circle of the face of the planet, right? He wanted to increase violence to solve the problem. Those two ideas are directly opposite to each other, and as such create interesting mechanics to each other, even if these characters don't directly interact that much with each other even. But then starting in season 4, up until this very point, it's just been plot points. And I think that is the central problem that we really, really run into. Last season, season 6, there was one moment where I personally fell in love with that season, and that is like Viren's entire like redemption arc, right? And the climax of that being Viren using a part of his own body as the source of dark magic, which goes against the way dark magic works, usually by taking magic from something else. He was taking the magic from inside of himself. I talked about that on, at no end in the season 6 video. I really, really liked that because there was subtext there. And I kind of, looking back at it now, the reason that I liked that moment so much in season 6 is because the rest of this show is kind of lacking in subtext. And it is just very shallow in a lot of ways. Now that we're talking about dark magic anyway, I want to bring up one last point that I am just now thinking about. And aside from that, I think I've spoken my piece. But at the end of the season, it seems like Claudia can just do dark magic without any source. Because she certainly doesn't have the staff anymore, because Callum is holding the staff at that point. She escapes through a portal that Erebos makes for her, which, I mean, that in and of itself is fine, I guess. Again, I think it's kind of creepy the way that he imprints his daughter onto her, but that's kind of part of the character, so that's fine. But she escapes. She has no source. Is the necklace that she has, does that work as like a source of magic? Because with dark magic, you consume the source of magic. So you would think that would be a one-off thing. Except if that thing is like a semi-primal stone, but at that point it wouldn't need to be dark magic that she's using. So why are I still glowing purple? Because she's definitely like doing spells, like those rock hands that come out of the ground to squeeze like Soren and Corvus, and then she like sprouts wings magically again and flies off. And she doesn't have a staff at that point. How is she doing magic? Is she just so nuts at dark magic now that she can just kind of do it? Feels like they probably should explain that as well. Especially since the entire point of dark magic is that you're using somebody else's like life force or like magical essence to fuel it, and they just kind of seem to abandon that at some point without really explaining very well why. And when I'm complaining about there being no subtext to the show, I mean in like characterization and character motivation and again like philosophical theming, not in world building, how the magic system works. I very much do want that explained, unless you're specifically making a very soft magic system, but that's not what we have here. We have a magic system with very well set up rules, and it just kind of seemed like they stopped following their own rules without telling us why. Again, there might be a reason. In like season 9, they might give us a reason why. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't bad here. So, altogether, I've complained a lot in this video. And again, I had a fun time watching this season. We get a lot more Erebos, which is always a fun time for me. I kind of don't like the way that they leaned into cartoon villain a little bit with him at times. But for the most part, he was fine. He was fun to watch. He's always a nice, mysterious, nuanced character. For the most part, to play around with, and you can really when they're at the moon nexus, you can really tell that he's like, ah man, I'm kind of a dick. But let's lean into that and fucking just make everybody suffer. But you can tell that he's bothered by the fact that he has been manipulating Claudia. Because again, he just imprinted his daughter onto this new daughter. And I will certainly say that after season 3 ended, a lot of people were like, is it worth my time to keep watching beyond? Season 4, season 5, and so on. After season 4, and even after season 5, my answer had been probably not. After season 6, my answer to that was, it's going to be a rough watch, but I think it's going to be worth it. You probably should give it a shot. Now, after season 7, I am back into maybe don't bother territory a little bit again. At least until we get confirmation that there's going to be more. And even then, I'm hesitant giving any recommendations until that new content shows up. Because at this point, I genuinely do feel that season 1 through 3 was lightning in a bottle that they just cannot recreate. The only hope that I have is that the entire mess of a spiderweb story that has been the core problem in season 4 through 7, now that everything's kind of wrapped up neatly at one endpoint and season 8 can start from one starting point again, they will be able to keep it from spiderwebbing out as much and keep it with just 2 or maybe 3 separate plot lines going at any given time. And as such, give the chance to develop those storylines a little bit more. Because as it stands right now, a lot of these storylines feel like a second or third draft of a script. Not a finalized script at all. And maybe with a little bit more time to focus on fewer stories that are given more time, they can still scrape things together. But until I see them do that, I will keep watching. I will not recommend this show to other people. So that's been my thoughts on season 7. If you disagree, that's your problem. I don't know when I'll be back with more content. It's been quite a while since I uploaded anything on this channel. It's probably gonna be quite a while longer because the podcast is kind of on hold. Just life is busy. So there's supposed to be a new Avatar show coming out, I think, in 2025, right? I'm probably gonna do episode reviews of that when it comes out. So you can look forward to that. But aside from that, it's probably gonna be a few months before you hear from me again. So have a good one.